Dirty Business, Channel 4's new docudrama series, has been hitting our screens this week, and it's all about the pollution caused by the water industry in England, so I make no apology for reverting once more to my image about water. So the series is mostly, as I say, about pollution. It's about the extraordinary quantity of untreated sewage pouring into our rivers and seas, and the complete failure of regulation of the regulatory system of the companies and the regulators to prevent that from happening, and all the cover-ups that have taken place. And it's just an absolutely appalling indictment of the governance, not just of the industry, but more broadly, just the way the government operates in terms of allocating responsibilities for things and making sure things happen, and what it does when they don't. So the entire failure of the English water companies, the entire system in a sense, is in microcosm a picture of the failure of the UK institutionally, the way the government seems to have resigned responsibility for so many of the important things in our lives. But since this is bonkers economics, let's start with the economic picture. And what this shows is the amount of money the government received here when it sold the water industry, the English water companies, back in 1989, and the amount of money that those water companies have paid themselves, their shareholders, in dividends in the 40 years since then. So that takes us to 2019. If we were to update this slither here would be somewhat smaller relatively, and this would be a good bit bigger because the situation has got significantly worse. So that's the background, so to speak, and we can see that the privatisation of the English water companies has been a complete disaster in value terms for the government, and therefore for all the rest of us. Leave aside the regulatory situation, which has got so out of hand. So I guess the big question is, why will the government not renationalise the water industries, as it's considering doing, or as it's in the process of doing with railways, for example? And the government will say, well, we can't afford to. They're going to say it's going to cost £100 billion to renationalise those water companies. Well, that's based on a valuation of those water companies, of their assets, which is entirely derived from the money which water bill payers, you and me, have invested in that period of time. So what happens is that the water regulator tells the companies how much they can and must charge customers of money which they are going to invest in infrastructure. So all that investment in infrastructure, in reservoirs and treating stations and pumping stations and that sort of thing, all that is coming straight from customers. So all the government would have to do is say, well, hang on a minute, that doesn't really belong to the water companies, that belongs to the customers. So we'll strip all that out of the valuation, and then we can renationalise the companies for very little money. So the government could do that, and that's probably not, therefore, the reason why it's not doing that. I think the government is not wanting to renationalise the water industries for two other reasons. The first is the reputational damage it will cause the government. Imagine if all these outflowings of raw, untreated sewage into rivers and seas was the responsibility directly of the government, if it was a government-owned organisation that was doing this. Imagine the outcry. The government would be really under the cosh. And another reason is that the UK as an economy is massively in debt to the rest of the world, because we import far more than we export, and we're having to sell assets to foreigners to pay off our debts all the time, and the government is dependent on inflows of foreign money into the UK economy, and those inflows come in the forms of what they call foreign investment. That means foreigners buying British productive assets. And most of these water companies are in fact owned by foreigners. And the government thinks that if it were to renationalise, if it were to interfere in any way, it would turn off that tap of money which is flowing into the UK economy, buying up the last few scraps of the economy that are available for sale. And if that stops happening, then our balance of payment situation will become even worse, and the pound will fall, and all sorts of other consequences will follow. So the government's frightened fundamentally of what will happen if it ceases to attract foreign investment. So what we've got here is a government that's rendering itself completely powerless. It's saying we can't do a thing. It's saying it's somebody else who's got all the power. It's the markets who have all the control. It's the foreign investors who control what we do. We're maybe the government, but we can't do anything about it. We're stuck with the situation, and you've just got to suck it up. Well, is that acceptable? Is that what a government should be doing? After all, the government is where all the money comes from. The government has far, far more control in this situation than it wants to admit. It's rendering itself powerless, which makes you wonder, why have a government at all? What's the government for? The purpose of a government is to manage these problems. The purpose of the government is to take control. The purpose of a government is to ensure that things happen which improve the quality of our lives. It's a collective operation designed to make things better. Government is not there to serve the interests of the bond market, it's not there to serve the interests of rich investors, it's there to serve the interests of the economy as a whole. And this is where the whole conversation, I think, becomes a bit different, because we've been talking about the economy, we've been talking about bonkers economics, but maybe we should be talking about bonkers government. Because the point here is not that we have no solution to the problem. We have a solution to the problem of water. We have solutions to all sorts of problems faced in the UK economy. The problem is the government won't take responsibility for making those solutions happen. The government has rendered itself powerless. It thinks it can't do anything. It's forgetting, as I say, it's forgetting that it is responsible for the shape of the economy. The government creates all the money in the economy. The government puts that money into the economy. It has power to control largely where that money goes in the economy. It can direct activity within the economy to ensure that we get the outcomes that we want. It doesn't have to be in hock to a bond market or to foreign investors or anybody else if it chooses to structure the economy in a productive way which is in all our interests. So frankly, it's just embarrassing watching the government flailing around, not knowing what to do, frightened of everybody, not able to face down the bond markets, not able to restructure the economy in any sort of way at all that can make it more productive. The government saying it can't do anything, it's wringing its hands, blaming everything on everybody else. It's putting the water industry as far away from it as possible so it doesn't have to take responsibility for everything we saw on television this week. It's just, as I say, it's embarrassing. It's distressing and embarrassing and depressing and everything else that the government won't get a grip of this. And it's not just this government, it's been governments for decades that won't get a grip, trying to make it somebody else's problem. So why have a government at all? Well, the answer is we need a government that will get a grip, that will reframe the way the economy operates, will reframe the way society operates in a way which will allow things to work for us, work for ordinary people, and put the priorities of ordinary people far ahead of those of these bond markets, foreign investors, and other financial interests that have dominated things for far too long.